Uplink confirmed. The iron firewall is holding. Subscribe now to secure your terminal in the Iowa sector. Don't let the surface noise drown out the truth. Local data synchronized. Check the links in the description below to access the raw schematics and evidence logs for today's briefing. The architect is online. We're building for the collapse. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to help us reinforce the grid.
Drawing heavy voltage for this analysis. Hit that notification bell while I stabilize the grid. You don't want to be offline when the next breach hits.
Corporate intrusion detected. To fund our countermeasures, join the xRTFMx-URSA. We need the resources to keep this sector dark. Internal flow is stable. Comment below and tell us which technological artifact we should de-redact next. Your input guides the scavenger.
The signal is fading into the static. Subscribe to the bunker now before the surface noise cuts our transmission for good.
The truth is permanent, but access is restricted. Click the link in the description to join our community and see the files they tried to wipe.
The biological backdoor is closed. Join the xRTFMx-URSA, stay system literate, and we'll see you at the next breach. Logging out. The autopsy on subject name begins now. Subscribe to the black box to witness the forensic truth. Decryption of the black box is complete. Check the links in the description for the full technical breakdown. Physical evidence doesn't lie. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to help us deconstruct the wreckage. Stabilizing the forensic terminal. Hit that notification bell to ensure the log stays synced to your device. Counter-intrusion active. Support the mission. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to keep the corporate vultures away from our data. Archiving the disaster. Tell us in the comments which mechanical failure we should investigate next.
The signal is dropping. Subscribe to the black box now to stay updated on the next catastrophic failure.
The evidence is permanent. Click the link in the description to join our crew and see the restricted findings.
The human element was the first failure. Join the xRTFMx crew, read the manual, and stay safe. Logging out. The vision is live. Subscribe to secure your feed and watch us pull the truth from the shadows. Rendering matrix at maximum resolution. Check the links in the description to see the raw visual evidence for yourself. The architect is online. We build what they try to hide. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to keep the engine running. Grid stabilized. Hit that notification bell while we warm up the next render. Don't let the signal drop. Breach detected in the firewall. Support our defense by joining the xRTFMx-URSA. We need the numbers to hold the line. 32 terabytes and counting. Comment below with the next subject we should render in 8K.
The broadcast is fading. Subscribe now to stay synced before the storm wipes the frequency.
The files are secured. Click the link in the description to access the restricted investigation logs.
Memory is the first target. Join the xRTFMx-URSA, stay literate, and keep the vision alive. Logging out.
System boot sequence initialize. Welcome to the xRTFMx core system logs. You are accessing the primary bunker backbone. This is the master record of the cybernetic crew, mechanical failure autopsies, and deep data forensic reconstruction. The following transmission is a direct feed from the physical network chunks. System synchronization complete. Proceeding with the official data dump.
Oh man, it never gets any less chilling to hear that exact sequence.
Right.
Like it genuinely feels like you're waking up something massive, something that's just been asleep underground for decades, you know?
Yeah, totally. So, I want you to imagine this scenario for a second. Let's say a state-of-the-art airliner, like maybe a Boeing 777, just falls completely out of the sky.
Right.
Total catastrophic failure. And by the time the recovery teams actually find the black box, it has been subjected to, well, a 600-mile-per-hour impact, plus a multi-thousand-degree jet fuel fire, and, you know, maybe it spent months sitting at the crushing bottom of the ocean.
It's basically not even a box anymore at that point.
Exactly. It is just this solid, fused block of scorched titanium and melted slag. So where does that go? Like, how do you extract a fragile, microscopic string of digital truth from a hunk of dead metal.
Well, I mean, you certainly don't send it to a standard corporate IT lab, right?
No, definitely not.
Because standard labs use standard software, and standard software assumes the hardware is basically intact.
Right.
But when you are dealing with catastrophic global engineering failures, I mean, when airplanes drop or nuclear reactors melt down or entire industrial grids just collapse, the standard playbook is completely useless. You need an environment that operates under a completely different paradigm of engineering.
And that is exactly what we have our hands on today for this deep dive. We have acquired this unprecedented, massive, 5-volume data leak detailing an installation known only as xRTFMx.
It's just wild.
It really is. It's this brutal, retro-futuristic subterranean bunker. It is buried exactly 200 feet underground in some undisclosed location. And its entire reason for existing is to capture, dissect, and physically autopsy the world's worst technological disasters.
Yeah, and we're going to take you completely inside this facility today. I mean, the documentation we have is incredibly dense, it's heavily technical, and frankly, it's pretty terrifying in its implications.
Oh, absolutely.
But we are making a promise to you right now. We are going to take our time with this. We're going to unpack the physics, the mechanics, and, the sheer brute force required to keep this bunker running.
Yeah, there will be no skimming today. We are going to exhaustively detail every single system layer by layer. We aren't skipping over a single technical hurdle.
Because to truly grasp what this facility does, you have to understand its underlying philosophy.
Right.
The people and the entities that built this place, they believe that modern technology is fundamentally fragile.
Yeah, they don't trust the cloud. They don't trust wireless networks. They don't even trust modern operating systems.
Exactly. So to understand how they tear apart disasters, we first have to understand how they build a fortress of absolute, uncorrupted logic.
So let's start at the absolute center of it all. Sector 0, the primary backbone, the beating heart of raw power.
Right. And the physical environment of Sector 0 tells you everything you need to know about their paranoia. The primary server vault is encased in Class 4 reinforced concrete.
Wow.
And inside that vault, the networking layout completely ignores everything we've done in networking over the last 30 years. Like, there's absolutely zero wireless capability.
No Wi-Fi?
No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no cellular reception at all. They utilize what's called a hardwired, closed-loop star topology.
Okay, so a star topology basically means every single peripheral device, every terminal, and every sensor connects directly back to one central hub, right? Like spokes on a bicycle wheel.
Yes, exactly.
But making it a closed loop is the crucial part here. It is completely physically severed from the outside world.
Right. I mean, it's a complete rejection of modern convenience in favor of absolute, uncompromising security. In a modern data center, servers are talking to other servers across the globe constantly.
Oh, yeah. Pinging stuff all over the place.
But here, the network terminates at the concrete wall. By making it a closed loop, it becomes physically impenetrable to remote digital intrusion. You literally cannot hack this bunker from a laptop in a coffee shop.
Right. To access this network, you would literally have to dig 200 feet straight down through solid bedrock.
Yeah.
And then survive their perimeter defenses, walk into Sector 0, physically strip the insulation off a copper wire, and manually splice your hardware right into the wall.
It's insane. And the physical cables they use to build this star topology are just wild. The schematics show two distinct parallel networks running everywhere.
Okay.
The first is Category 6A shielded twisted pair, or STP copper lines. And those run right alongside massive, armored, multi-mode fiber optic trunk lines.
So wait, if you're building the ultimate network, why use both? Like, why rely on old-school copper wire when you have light-speed fiber optics?
Well, it's a very strict division of labor based entirely on physics. You have to look at what they're transmitting.
Okay.
The STP copper lines are heavily shielded. They have this conductive foil wrapping to block external electromagnetic interference. Copper is highly reliable for what we call immediate low-latency analog pulses.
Ah, I see.
Think about the exact microsecond of contact. A human finger presses a key on a mechanical keyboard. That single volt of electricity needs to hit the mainframe instantly, right? It doesn't need to be translated or encoded by a laser.
Right, copper is perfect for that raw, immediate command line interrupt.
Exactly. But copper has a very rigid physical bandwidth limit. I mean, if you try to shove a terabyte of data through a copper wire, it takes hours.
Which is where the fiber optics come in, because when Sector 1 is actively rendering deep, high-resolution audio and visual forensics of a crash site, we're talking massive terabyte-sized data streams, copper would just choke.
it would completely choke.
Mhm.
Multi-mode fiber optics use lasers to transmit data as pulses of light, bouncing off the inside of a glass core.
And multi-mode specifically means the glass core is wider, right? Allowing multiple light pulses to travel simultaneously at slightly different angles.
You got it. It handles the massive payload of forensic data, while the copper handles the heartbeat and the reflexes of the bunker.
Okay, so you have this immense web of copper and glass running into the central servers, and the server racks themselves are completely custom too.
Oh yeah, these aren't standard, flimsy aluminum data center cabinets that you can just roll around on caster wheels.
Definitely not. They are custom-built 42U enclosures, meaning they hold 42 standard units of rack space. But they are forged from repurposed heavy-grade blast shielding.
Yeah.
And they don't just sit on the floor. They are violently bolted directly into massive grounding plates embedded right in the subfloor.
And that rigid mounting is a vital engineering requirement. It mitigates two very specific physical threats. First, severe electromagnetic interference, or EMI, and second, tectonic shifts.
Wow, earthquakes.
Exactly. When these servers engage in heavy forensic processing, the physical vibration of the cooling systems and the localized electromagnetic fields are so intense that they could literally unseat the physical RAM sticks right out of the motherboards.
No way. Just shake them loose.
Shake them right out. If they weren't bolted down with heavy iron blast shielding to absorb that kinetic energy, the machines would literally shake themselves to pieces.
Let's break down how the data actually routes between these servers then. Because there are no sleek, software-defined network switches here, the routing requires a completely manual patch panel interface.
Right.
Every single data pipe has to be physically verified at a cross-connect frame using a mechanical punch-down interconnect. Now, if you've never wired a house for Ethernet, a punch-down interconnect might sound kind of foreign. Can you explain the actual physics of what a punch-down tool does?
Yeah, it's beautifully primitive and incredibly secure. I mean, in your house or office, you probably plug a plastic RJ45 connector into a port until you hear that tiny plastic click.
Right, super easy.
It's convenient, but it's fragile. The plastic tab can snap or the plug can vibrate loose. A punch-down interconnect is an older, vastly more permanent mechanical connection.
Right, you don't just plug something in, you are basically forging a physical connection.
Exactly. You have a block with these tiny V-shaped metal clips. The technician takes the bare insulated copper wire, lays it directly across the top of that V-shaped clip, and then uses a heavy spring-loaded punch-down tool.
And they just jam it in there.
Yeah. You press down hard until the tool violently fires, forcing the wire deep into the narrow bottom of the V. And as the wire is forced down, the sharp metal edges of the clip slice straight through the wire's plastic insulation.
And bites directly into the soft copper core.
Right. It creates what's known as a cold welded joint. The friction and pressure essentially merge the two metals, creating this highly secure, physically immovable connection that cannot vibrate loose no matter how much the bunker shakes.
That is wild. And the layout relies on 4 of these massive mechanical punch-down frames. The main distribution frame, or the MDF, is located in Sector 0 North. That is the master trunk. It's essentially the brainstem of the entire bunker. All logic flows through there.
Right.
Then you have Intermediate Distribution Frame 1, or IDF1, which is designated bunker. And IDF1 exclusively handles raw environment telemetry, air quality, temperature, structural integrity.
Which is kept entirely separate from IDF2, designated Black Bee box. That frame is dedicated solely to the incoming raw forensic mechanical capture from the autopsy slabs.
Got it.
And finally, you have IDF3, ORION, which handles the deep data processing matrix. And the blueprints specifically note that the ORION frame is heavily shielded with thick lead lining.
Which perfectly segments the facility. Like,
Oh, yeah.
if the environment sensors in IDF1 short circuit, it physically cannot jump the gap and corrupt the forensic data in IDF2. But all of this intricate copper, all this glass, all these cold welded joints, none of it matters without raw power. And this is where the engineering steps out of the IT realm and into something completely brutalist. I really want to spend a lot of time here because this completely blew my mind.
Oh, the power generation is incredible.
You cannot just type a command or push a button to turn this bunker on.
No, the initialization sequence is this grueling physical ordeal. The primary power plant for this entire facility is a massive, twin-turbocharged, inline-6 diesel generator.
A diesel generator.
But it is not connected to a modern electric starter. It is linked to a heavy-duty fluid drive manual transmission.
Wait,
I know. They are literally using massive iron planetary gears, manual brass synchronizer rings, and a high-ratio twin-disc clutch to boot up a computer system.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because the immediate question is why? Why use a manual automotive transmission on a stationary generator?
Well, it solves a massive, terrifying physics problem inherent to data centers. When you flip the breaker to turn on an entire server farm simultaneously, every single capacitor, every power supply, and every motor demands its maximum amperage load instantaneously.
Right.
In a normal electrical grid, this creates a massive spike in demand.
Right, the inrush current.
Exactly. But here, the generator is the entire grid. When that inrush current hits, the alternator physically resists spinning because of the sudden massive electromagnetic load.
Oh, wow.
This creates a violent, instantaneous torque shockwave that travels straight down the drive shaft to the diesel engine. If they used a standard electric relay to engage the load, the shock would either instantly stall the multi-ton engine or it would physically shear the steel drive shaft in half.
That is terrifying.
So by using a heavy-duty mechanical transmission, the operator can manually ride the clutch. They can intentionally slip the friction plates to absorb and slowly manage that massive kinetic shockwave.
It's exactly like trying to pop the clutch on a heavy-duty, fully loaded 18-wheeler truck while facing uphill. If you just dump your foot off the clutch pedal too fast.
The truck violently jerks and the engine completely stalls out.
Right. But if you stall this generator and shear the shaft, the entire subterranean facility goes completely dark. The liquid cooling systems fail, and the forensic data you were trying to save dies instantly.
Which is why the startup sequence is so meticulously manual. I mean, the logs provide the exact procedure. Before you even touch the starter, you have to preheat the heavy diesel fuel oil mixture.
It's freezing down there.
Yeah, the ambient temperature in the bunker is extremely cold, and heavy diesel turns to sludge at those temperatures. You have to use heating coils to bring the fuel exactly to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, just to ensure proper atomization when it hits the fuel injectors.
And then the operator has to physically walk over and check the hydraulic torque converter housing. The transmission fluid levels must be steady at exactly 95 psi. And I love this detail from the logs. The manual specifically instructs the operator to physically tap the glass of the analog gauge with their finger to ensure the needle isn't sticking.
Yes.
It is highly tactile. You cannot trust a digital readout. You have to feel the machine.
Once the fluid pressure is verified, you manually throw a heavy throw mechanical lever to engage the low gear starter assembly. This completely bypasses the electric starter solenoid.
Why bypass the solenoid?
Because the starter solenoid is the first thing to fry in an EMP, so they rely on direct mechanical leverage. Once the diesel engine fires, you don't just put it in gear, you stand there watching an analog tachometer, waiting until the massive pistons synchronize and the engine RPM climbs and holds at exactly 1200.
Okay, so it has to be steady.
Only then, at exactly 1200 RPM, do you smoothly engage the main heavy-duty clutch lever to lock the transmission shaft to the high-output alternator.
And even then, with the engine screaming and the alternator spinning, you still cannot just flip the breaker to the servers. The electrical output must stabilize at 480-volt three-phase AC power.
Right.
The operator has to stare at a green, glowing oscilloscope screen. The wave on the screen will be jagged and chaotic at first. Only when the operator visually confirms a perfectly clean, smooth electrical sine wave on the oscilloscope are the primary breaker panels manually switched to the on-end position.
So now, the raw mechanical power has been cleanly converted into electrical power. The servers have voltage. Now the system has to actually boot up. And the operating system they use is just as archaic and bulletproof as the diesel generator.
Oh, yeah.
There's no graphical user interface. There is no mouse. There are no folders to click on. It is a hardened proprietary command line interface based on DOS disk operating system. They call it xRTFMx-URSA version 1.5, running on an ancient x86 16-bit processing architecture.
Okay, wait. A 16-bit architecture. For the most advanced forensic bunker on the planet. A modern smartphone uses a 64-bit architecture and processes billions of calculations a second. Why regress to something you'd find in a dusty beige computer from the 1980s?
Well, it's a concept known as security through obsolescence, combined with extreme hardware hardening. A 16-bit processor is incredibly simple. It has a very limited instruction set.
Right.
Because it is so simple, there is literally nowhere for malicious code to hide. It is entirely impenetrable to modern AI probing or floating zero-day software threats because those threats rely on complex network layers and dynamic memory allocation that simply do not exist on a 16-bit chip.
It's too simple to be tricked.
Exactly. The system is deliberately dumb, and therefore it is heavily armored.
They even take the file system itself offline. The logs detail that the file allocation table, which is essentially the index that tells the computer where every file is located, and they use FAT16, isn't even stored on the spinning hard drive. It is hard-coded into solid-state EEPROM chips.
Let's explain why that matters mechanically. EEPROM stands for Electrically Erasable, Programmable, Read-Only Memory. Unlike a magnetic hard drive that uses a fragile mechanical arm to read microscopic magnetic poles on a spinning metal disk, an EEPROM chip stores data using arrays of floating gate transistors.
It traps electrons, right?
Exactly. It uses high voltage to physically force electrons through an insulating barrier and trap them on a floating gate. Once they are trapped, they stay there, representing a binary 1 or 0.
Wow.
There are no moving parts. The electrons are locked in a microscopic physical cage. Even if the bunker loses all power or is subjected to extreme physical trauma, those electrons don't move. The fundamental boot record physically cannot be corrupted by sudden power loss.
I want to read exactly what happens when the power hits those EEPROM chips because the logs provide the actual auto.exe.bat file line by line. If you grew up in the early days of computing, this is going to sound very familiar, but the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The system executes a basic BIOS hardware scan, and then the dark screen lights up with @ echo off, CLS, prompt of $P, $G, set xRTFMx_root equals C:\/SYS\core, set terminal_sector equals 0, set boot_mode equals secure_cold_iron.
For anyone unfamiliar, those first lines are setting the environmental variables. The echo off command tells the terminal to stop repeating the commands back to the user to keep the screen clear. CLS clear the screen, and then it establishes the root directory, confirming that they are initiating a cold boot from dead iron in sector 0.
Then it moves to loading the actual physical hardware drivers.
Yes.
So color loading network topology, load high C:/SYS\DRV/SCP_net.sys/speed equals 1000 /duplex equals full /force.
There are two incredible details in that single line. First is the force command flag. The software isn't asking the network card nicely if it's ready. It is violently overriding any hardware interrupt objections and forcing the copper lines to accept a 1000 megabit full duplex connection.
It just demands it.
Yes. Second is the command load-HIGH. In a 16-bit architecture, you only have 630 kilobytes of base memory. Load-HIGH physically pushes the network driver into the upper memory blocks of the chip's architecture, completely isolating it and freeing up the base memory for raw, heavy computational processing.
Next, it addresses these serial communications. Echo loading main I/OBS. Load high HC :/DRV/IBM_main.sys/port equals 03F8 /IRQ equals 4 /buffer equals 4096. And then we get to the really terrifying part of the boot sequence. Echo loading cybernetic neural link profiles. And then we get to the really terrifying part of the boot sequence. Load high HC :/SYS_cyber_BR.SYS /mode equals safe /auth equals true /voltage_reg equals on.
We're going to dive deeply into the cybernetic crew in a moment.
Yeah.
But look at that last parameter. It mandates that voltage regulation must be set to on.
Yeah.
Because the driver is directly managing the hardware that physically interfaces with a biological human brain, a voltage spike bypassing the regulator wouldn't just crash the computer, it would instantly execute the operator.
Oh my God, just instantly. After the drivers load, the memory allocation comes next. The system uses HiMem SYS and MM386.exe with specific flags like noems and HiScan to lock in rigid physical memory blocks. Then it forces a mechanical check of the storage drives by running chkdsk.exe.
Right, the check disk.
And the contingency for failure here is brutal. If the check disk throws an error level 1, meaning it found even a microscopic flaw on the platter surface, it doesn't try to fix it. It immediately jumps to a system-critical script printing in bright red text.
Magnetic drive corruption detected in sector 0, catastrophic failure imminent, manual intervention required, terminal halted. Please read the FA manual.
And that phrase right there is the namesake of the entire facility. xRTFMx, read the manual. Because if this foundational boot sequence fails, there is zero automated recovery.
Wow.
The system intentionally halts, forcing a human being to open a heavy paper manual, diagnose the hardware, and fix the physics of the problem.
And their paranoia about physical interference extends into the system resource allocation in the config.sys file. It says buffers equals 64, files equals 128, and then it's stack 6 equals 9,256.
That is a massive number.
Right. The logs explicitly state that this massive stack allocation is absolutely crucial to prevent stack overflow errors when hardware interrupts are triggered by unpredictable environmental components. They specifically cite the danger of high-voltage physical sparks hitting the copper wires behind the console.
Let's explain the mechanics of a stack overflow. In a processor, a stack is a specific region of memory that operates on a last-in, first-out basis. Think of it like a metal spike on a diner counter where the chef stabs paper order tickets.
Okay, I can picture that.
The last ticket you stab onto the spike is the first one you pull off. When the computer's running a program and gets interrupted, say someone presses a key, it takes its current task, stabs it onto the stack to remember where it was, handles the interrupts, and then goes back to the stack.
But if there are too many interruptions, the spike gets full.
Exactly. If the stack is full and it tries to push one more task onto it, the memory literally overflows into adjacent data blocks, causing a catastrophic, unrecoverable system crash. In a normal environment, you don't need many stacks.
Right.
But in Sector 0, the environment is so violently electrified that stray high-voltage sparks frequently strike the exposed copper network lines. The computer registers that random spark of electricity as a furious volley of millions of random keystrokes occurring in a microsecond.
So it tries to stab millions of nonsense interrupt tickets onto the spike all at once.
Yes. By permanently allocating 9,256 massive stacks in the base configuration, they are ensuring that when an electrical explosion sends a cascade of random high-voltage error signals down the copper lines, the processor won't crash. It has enough space on the spike to buffer all those chaotic electrical errors, dismiss them as noise, and keep the core facility alive.
Which brings us to the actual entities sitting at these consoles dealing with the sparks. The logs refer to them as the cybernetic bear crew. These are biological human units that have been horrifically augmented with ruggedized mechanical frames, industrial hydraulics, and direct neural-to-digital hardware links.
Yeah.
Now, I have to challenge the fundamental premise here. If this bunker is so incredibly dangerous, I mean, we just established that consoles are getting hit with high-voltage sparks and the air is freezing. Why use biological brains at all? We have the technology to build fully automated robotic arms. Why not just use 100% robots? It feels needlessly cruel and risky.
It is a valid objection, and it sounds like madness at first.
Yeah.
But the logs provide a brilliant, sobering justification. You have to look at the limitations of robotics in a crisis. A purely mechanical robot operates on pre-programmed loops. It executes the code it was given.
Right, follows instructions.
If a robot encounters a variable that isn't in its code, say a severed wire sparking in a pool of hydraulic fluid, it cannot improvise. It throws an error and freezes.
It completely lacks intuition.
Precisely. The biological baseline of these cybernetic units grants them intuitive, tactile dexterity and the ultimate heuristic processing power human instinct. When a catastrophic crisis is unfolding and the digital sensors are blindingly corrupted with noise, these operators need to be able to diagnose failing physical wiring by touch.
Oh, wow.
They need to rewrite failing hexadecimal code by feel on the fly, guessing what a corrupted line is supposed to be based on decades of experience. A biological brain can adapt to chaotic, undocumented variables that would permanently paralyze a digital algorithm.
But the trade-off is that they are physically fused to the bunker architecture. Their biological neural pathways are heavily modified to interface with custom-molded, solid, gold-plated connection pins that run vertically streaked down their spinal columns.
It's intense.
Those pins lock into heavy, thick ribbon cables that drop from their chairs directly into the subfloor motherboard slots. They are no longer just operating the mainframe. They are a physical, biological extension of the motherboard.
Let's look closely at the hardware specifications for the unit designated 0. 0 sits at the absolute center console in Sector 0. Directly beneath the primary lightning matrix, acting as the master hardware inspector.
The specs for 0 are terrifying. 0 uses a modified IBM Neuralink Series 4. This interface translates the operator's biological visual tracking, literally where their eyes are looking directly into terminal screen inputs via a 16-bit analog-to-digital matrix converter.
So no mouse at all.
Right. They don't use a mouse. They look at a line of code, think the command, and the reaction time is measured in microseconds. But their physical body is heavily augmented too. Zero's upper limbs have been replaced with machine-heavy industrial aluminum armatures running on sealed, oil bath planetary gear sets.
Because Zero is the master hardware tech, the right armature isn't just a hand. It's a literal toolbox hardwired directly into the human nervous system.
Just built right in.
Built right in. The forearm casing houses a built-in serial bus analyzer capable of sniffing raw data packets directly from copper wires. There is a red LED digital multimeter readout display embedded directly into the chassis of the forearm. And most incredibly, there is a precision micro-soldering element built straight into the index finger probe.
So if a motherboard trace burns out, Zero just points an index finger at it, the finger heats up to 600 degrees, and they resolder the board on the fly without ever breaking visual contact with the screen.
Exactly. And speaking of visual contact, Zero's biological left eye was surgically excised and replaced with a dual-lens cathode ray tube, a miniaturized CRT sensor array.
Now, why is CRT in an eyeball? That seems ridiculously bulky.
Well, it's to combat the specific optical limitations of the human eye against old technology. The bunker relies entirely on archaic neon green phosphorus CRT monitors. If a human stares at those screens for 72 straight hours during an autopsy, the harsh refresh rate causes severe neurological fatigue, and the brightness causes retina burn.
Oh, I see.
The CRT-I synchronizes perfectly with the 60 Hz refresh rate of the monitor, completely eliminating flicker latency and protecting the biological optic nerve. Furthermore, if the bunker's ambient lighting completely fails in a blackout, Zero CRT-I can still perfectly read the faint glow of the data streams in pitch darkness.
Zero's single operational directive is to maintain absolute system integrity at all costs. If the automated scripts freeze, Zero executes physical code injection via manual command line entry at superhuman speeds. Now, flanking Zero is the auxiliary unit at the left console, designated SDS Primey. Primey's job is environment capture and perimeter defense telemetry. Because the left console sits physically closer to the massive high-voltage trunk lines entering the bunker, Primey is heavily armored.
Yes, the schematics show that Primey's mechanical chassis is heavily plated in solid grounded copper. This essentially turns the operator's body into a personal walking Faraday cage.
And a Faraday cage absorbs and distributes electromagnetic radiation around the exterior of the cage, preventing it from reaching the interior, right?
Correct. The copper plating absorbs the raw electromagnetic pulses leaking from the high voltage lines and safely shunts the energy down through grounding cables in the chair, completely protecting Primey's fragile biological brainstem.
That's incredible.
And unlike Zero's precision micro-soldering arms, Primey's armatures are built purely for brute force. The hands are designed to grip massive manual rotary dials, execute high-speed toggle switching, and perform patch cable hot swapping where heavy gauge wires have to be violently yanked and reseated. Primey sits there, absorbing raw analog telemetry, stripping out the electrical noise, and dumping the clean data directly into the FAT16 storage arrays.
Okay, we keep mentioning high-voltage sparks, EMPs, and massive electrical interference, which brings us to the centerpiece of Sector Zero. The logs call it the central lightning matrix. I initially assumed this was just the power supply, but it's not. This is high-voltage processing.
Right.
The logs explicitly state that standard silicon processors simply cannot handle the sheer mathematical volume of parallel processing required to calculate all the variables of a catastrophic disaster simultaneously.
Oh.
So instead of microchips, the bunker uses raw, uncontained electrical plasma as a computational medium.
This is perhaps the most astounding engineering feat in the entire leak. If we connect this to the broader history of computing, this is analogous to ancient analog computing, but pushed to an apocalyptic extreme.
Yeah.
Before digital microchips, analog computers solved math equations using physical electrical voltages. The bunker scales this up to a terrifying degree. In the center of Sector Zero sits a massive, solid table of heavily doped borosilicate glass. This glass acts as a gigantic dielectric capacitor.
And from a heavy tungsten cathode suspended above the table, a continuous deafening electrical arc, literal lightning, strikes the dead center of the glass block.
Right. As the lightning strikes the glass, it fiercely branches out across the surface, aggressively seeking the path of least resistance toward physical grounding nodes at the edges of the table.
But how does that do math?
Through chaos theory. The bunker utilizes high-speed optic sensors mounted in the ceiling to measure the exact chaotic, jagged pathways the electricity takes across the glass. Because plasma behaves unpredictably based on microscopic variations in temperature and air density, they use the random branching of the plasma arcs as an unhackable, physical random number generator.
Oh, wow.
But they also use it for parallel processing. By feeding different voltages into the nodes and measuring how the arc deflects, they can solve massive fluid dynamic equations instantly.
The raw physics of this are staggering. The logs show the arc core temperature sits consistently between 4,500 and 6,000 degrees Celsius. That is literally the temperature of the surface of the sun contained inside a bunker.
It is incredibly precarious. The logs note that if the ambient cooling fails and the arc temperature exceeds 8,500 degrees, the borosilicate glass undergoes vitrification. It loses its structural integrity and melts into a useless glowing puddle of slag. The peak voltage output of this matrix is between 1.2 and 1.5 megavolts. If the power spikes and hits 2.1 megavolts, the plasma physically breaches the magnetic containment shielding.
And what about the capacitance bleed rate? The manual lists it at exactly 0.05 farads per second. What happens if the glass absorbs too much energy and that bleed rate drops below 0.01 farads per second?
That is the nightmare scenario. If the glass reaches total capacitance and can no longer absorb energy, the table overloads. The raw electricity bypasses the grounding nodes at the edge of the glass, jumps the gap, and arcs directly into the metal command chairs, instantly frying the neural links of the cybernetic crew.
Just cooking them alive in their seats. To stop this from happening, massive, thumb-thick grounding cables run directly from the legs of the glass table down through the floor and into a subterranean pool of highly conductive liquid coolant to bleed off the excess voltage.
So with all this chaotic raw plasma processing math and the archaic 16-bit DOS code running the terminals, how does the resulting data actually move reliably between the different sectors of the bunker?
Right, they have to communicate.
The documentation details the network routing and terminal handshake protocols. They rely entirely on a token ring network.
I feel like anyone who worked in an office in the early 90s just shuddered at the phrase token ring. But here, it's not software. It's a physical reality. It is exactly what it sounds like, a closed physical loop of wire.
Yeah.
When a terminal needs to send data, a physical interrupt request is generated by a heavy mechanical switch inside the console, sending a 5-volt analog pulse down the STP copper line to the main distribution frame. 0 intercepts that physical pulse, halts all background processing, and passes a digital token to that specific terminal.
The token ring is a highly ordered system designed to solve a critical physical problem, which is packet collisions. Imagine two people trying to shout instructions at you at the exact same time. It just becomes noise. On a slow-speed copper bus, if two terminals try to transmit data simultaneously, the voltages overlap and the data instantly corrupts. In a token ring protocol, there is a literal digital baton circulating the network. Only the terminal physically holding the digital token is allowed to speak.
It's like the talking stick in a kindergarten circle, but for high-stakes digital forensics. Once the black box terminal in Sector 1 receives the token, it holds the line open and sends a 32-bit hex code requesting a specific file. Orion in Sector 2 hears the request, physically finds the magnetic tape, reads it, and streams the data back. When it's done, it relinquishes the token back to the ring.
But the bunker's strict philosophy of perfection makes this punishing. If a single data packet drops during transmission because of a microsecond power fluctuation from the lightning matrix, the system does not attempt to autocorrect or resend the packet.
It just fails.
It immediately throws a fatal parity error, blares a physical, deafening klaxon alarm throughout the entire bunker, dumps the entire transmission, and forces the biological operators to start the process over from scratch. It demands perfect mathematical accuracy over convenience.
Which perfectly aligns with their extreme contingency protocols. The foundational philosophy of xRTFMx is that automated technology will eventually, inevitably fail.
Yeah.
So every single digital system, no matter how advanced, has a hardwired, brute force mechanical override.
We see this clearly with the ultimate failsafe, the cold iron reset. If the main by86 processor at the MDF completely freezes due to a logic lock or an EMP spike, you can't just press CTRL ALTD ill.
Right.
The operator has to physically disconnect from their neural link, stand up, walk across the room to the primary breaker panel on the concrete wall, and grasp a heavy, 2-foot-long, solid copper contact lever.
And when they pull that lever down, it physically severs the heavy gauge cables connecting the massive diesel alternator to the server racks. It instantly dumps all volatile memory in the facility. Total blackout.
And then, the true value of the biological cybernetic crew shines. In the total darkness and silence, Lit only by their CRT eyes and emergency flares, the operators take out physical analog multimeters, oscilloscopes, and continuity testers.
They do it by hand.
They manually trace the miles of copper lines by hand, testing voltage at every node until they find the exact burnt resistor or fused relay that caused the initial freeze. They use their integrated soldering tools to fix the physical breach, and then they walk back and spin the massive diesel generator back up from scratch.
Like the manual states with green clarity, there are no tech support lines down here. There are no redundant cloud backups to restore from. When the system dies, you grab a physical schematic, pull out the tools, and read the effing manual.
That intense manual labor perfectly sets the stage for our transition into Section 2, Sector 1, which the logs designate as the Blassie Buy Box Forensic Theater. We now understand how the facility powers itself with diesel and plasma and how it secures its logic.
Right.
But how do they actually physically dissect the broken hardware recovered from surface-level disasters?
We move from the electrical hum of Sector 0 into the heavy industrial grind of Sector 1. The sheer physical scale here is hard to wrap your head around. It is an 80,000 square foot subterranean vault carved directly out of the bedrock.
It's massive.
And right in the dead center of this cavernous space is the primary diagnostic slab. It is a 12-ton solid block of machined titanium equipped with massive hydraulic lifts and multi-axis robotic armatures hanging from the ceiling.
They require a 12-ton titanium slab because they aren't just looking at tiny microchips. They are dealing with massive, horrific wreckage. Like a crushed flight data recorder fused to a jet turbine or a sheared industrial transmission housing from a collapsed crane.
Wow.
But despite the heavy, dirty machinery required to move this wreckage, the ambient environment immediately surrounding the slab is strictly controlled to absurd margins.
Right, they utilize massive overhead particulate filters to constantly scrub the air down to ISO Class 5 cleanroom standards, even while they are grinding through steel.
And it must be incredibly disorienting to work in. They have heavy acoustic dampening on the walls to muffle the deafening screams of the pneumatic drills, and the lighting is strictly restricted. You won't find bright white LED surgical lights here.
Oh.
The room is bathed entirely in dim, low-wavelength amber and neon green light. This is specifically to protect the exposed CRT ocular sensors of the cybernetic crew from being blinded during these brutal, grueling 72-hour autopsies.
You mentioned hydraulic lifts earlier, and the manual spends an inordinate amount of time on the heavy transmission and hydraulic feed rebuild protocols.
Mm-hmm.
The lifts that move the titanium slab and the massive blast doors sealing the sector all run on a centralized, heavy-duty hydraulic transmission system operating at a staggering 3,500 psi.
Yeah.
Now, I have to ask the obvious question here. Why are computer hackers and digital forensic experts suddenly acting as heavy machinery mechanics, rebuilding automotive-style transmissions?
Because of the brute force physical requirements of manipulating multi-ton wreckage, combined with the extreme environmental hazards of the bunker. You could use precision electric stepper motors to move the slab, but electric motors are fragile.
How so?
The copper windings in a stepper motor are highly sensitive to the massive EMP bursts constantly radiating from the plasma matrix in Sector 0. Hydraulics offer raw, uncorrupted, reliable mechanical power that is immune to electromagnetic interference.
But the central hydraulic pump providing that 3,500 psi is driven by a massive planetary gear set. And the maintenance logs outline a terrifying vulnerability. If a tiny piece of metallic debris, say a metal shaving from the wreckage being cut open, somehow bypasses the filters and scores the inside of a spool valve in the hydraulic valve body, it can cause the valve to stick open.
Oh, man.
This results in a violent, uncontrollable hydraulic pressure spike that would literally shatter the multi-ton titanium armatures, dropping the wreckage and destroying the evidence.
Which means the forensic operators have to constantly act as heavy-duty mechanics to maintain the lifts. The logs outline an exhausting maintenance routine. For the planetary gear assembly, the operators have to physically press out the massive old steel bearings using a 20-ton pneumatic shop press.
Yeah.
And they have to micrometer the new gears to ensure the pinion gear lash, the tiny gap between the gear teeth, doesn't exceed exactly 0.0005 inches of play. If there is more play than that, the gears will violently chatter under the heavy load.
And for the hydraulic valve body itself, they have to completely disassemble the intricate labyrinth plates, which look like heavy metal mazes directing the fluid. They submerge these heavy steel plates in a high-frequency sonic cleaner to vibrate away any microscopic clutch friction material.
It's so meticulous.
They inspect the massive torque converter for heat bluing, a sign the metal got too hot and lost its temper. And if the stator's internal one-way clutch slips even a fraction of a millimeter, they literally mount it on a balancing lathe and re-weld the seam by hand.
They even measure the internal friction clutches with delicate metal feeler gauges. The manual strictly states that if the clearance between the clutch plates exceeds 0.060 inches, the entire heavy drum stack must be discarded and replaced. It is a grueling, filthy, heavy metal contrast to the delicate digital work they perform on the slab.
And speaking of that delicate digital work, once the multi-ton wreckage is finally stabilized on the titanium slab, we get into the actual extraction of the truth. The manual covers the IBM-class magnetic drive diagnostics. How exactly do they get data off a hard drive that has been crushed in an airplane crash or melted in an industrial fire?
Standard digital extraction protocols are completely useless in these scenarios. Modern operating systems rely on something called logical block addressing, or LBA, to find files. LBA is essentially a map that the hard drive's firmware provides to the computer saying file X is located at block Y. But if a drive has been through a fire and the firmware chip is melted, the LBA map is gone. The computer sees the drive as completely blank or dead. The operators in Sector 1 have to physically bypass the LBA and interact directly with the cylinder head sector, or CHS geometry, at the absolute raw machine code level.
Let's break down CHS versus LBA. If LBA is the digital map, CHS is the physical reality. A hard drive is just spinning magnetic metal platters with a tiny robotic arm, the head floating microscopically above it, reading magnetic north and south poles.
Right.
CHS means telling that robotic arm manually, go to physical metal cylinder number 4, read with head number 2, and look at physical pi slice sector number 16.
Exactly. You are manually flying the robotic arm over the spinning metal. But to do this, the physical platters have to be liberated from the crushed casing. If the read/write heads have violently crashed onto the platters during the disaster, the operators move the drive into the absolute center of the ISO Class 5 cleanroom environment.
They carefully unscrew and remove the bent top cover. Then, they use a highly specialized custom-machined metal ramp tool to physically slide under the delicate headstack assembly. They gently park the heads onto the ramp, lifting them away so they don't drag across and irreparably scratch the magnetic data off the platters.
Yeah.
Then, using a specialized vacuum wand that grips the metal without touching the data surface, they extract the magnetic platters and delicately transplant them into a pristine donor chassis with a working motor and fresh heads.
Let's look at the actual system log dump provided in the documentation for this. This is a verified terminal readout from a forensic autopsy on a Class A industrial mainframe that suffered a catastrophic fire.
Right, so the log reads on the green screen. Initializing low-level drive diagnostics. SAS bracket drive identified. Magnetic platter array -10,000 RPM. SAS bracket drive identified. Warm bracket firmware microcode mismatch detected. Warm bracket SMART status. Catastrophic failure imminent.
The drive's internal self-monitoring tells the bunker it is practically dead. The logic board is fried, so the operator bypasses the logic and initiates a direct, raw serial handshake using a copper cable wired straight to the diagnostic pins on the drive.
C:\/SYS\DIA-G\/SXDMP.exe/port:/COM1/port/BOD:/port:/raw. And the read-only memory output of the drive spits back a fatal physical error code.
Yeah.
And the read-only memory output of the drive spits back a fatal physical error code. 0x04 spin-up failure, motor stall detected.
The heat of the fire melted the internal bearing. The spindle motor holding the platters is physically stuck. It can't spin up to 10,000 RPM. So the operator has to initiate a highly dangerous manual override.
C:\/SYS\motor_force.exe/voltage_boost:15 /bypass_checks.
And the system throws up a bright warning that overvolting a compromised spindle bearing could cause the metal platter to violently shatter like glass under the rotational stress.
But they do it anyway.
The operator simply types Y for yes.
It's a massive, terrifying physical risk. They apply a direct 15-volt electrical boost straight to the spindle controller, deliberately ignoring safety limits. The operator stands there, watching the physical analog gauge as the amperage draw rapidly climbs. 1.2 amps, 1.8 amps, 2.5 amps.
The copper wires are getting hot.
And then, with a violent shudder, the melted bearing unsticks. The heavy metal platters begin to scream as the RPM stabilizes at 9,980.
It is incredible. Once the platters are spinning at lethal speeds, the operator runs head_test.exe/CYL:0/head:0/SEC:1 that manually commands the arm to seek the absolute physical beginning of the disk. the master boot record.
Wow.
The terminal screen spits out endless lines of raw scrolling hexadecimal code and then finally confirms success bracket MBR located. Partition table readable. They then immediately initiate a slow, bit-for-bit raw binary clone to cold storage before the bearing melts again.
That raw, unformatted binary clone is the sole objective of Sector 1. It is important to note that Blackbotics does not analyze the data, it just physically extracts it from the wreckage.
Right.
Once they have the clean clone, the documentation details the Orion handoff protocol. The physical autopsy enters its final phase by handing the raw binary data off to Sector 2, Orion, for the actual complex heuristic analysis.
But this isn't just dragging and dropping a file on a desktop. The operator has to initiate a secure FTP session across those heavy fiber optic trunk lines we discussed earlier. The massive data payload is systematically broken down into small, segmented packets.
Right.
And each individual packet is wrapped in a complex cryptographic hash generated by the chaotic lightning matrix in Sector 0.
The checksum verification process is absolute and unforgiving. The log shows a hash string being calculated for the massive tarball archive, MD5 SUMBB_archive.tar.
After grinding through the math, it yields the specific hexadecimal hash. E4D909, C2900FB1, C068, F80D, F22CBD0.
It has to match perfectly. Sector 1 sends the file, and only when the Orion sector fully receives the file, calculates the exact same hash locally, and responds with that exact matching hexadecimal string is the physical handoff confirmed and the file locked in.
But the Black Box team's job is never really done. The brutal environment means the maintenance requirements are constant and grueling. The manual dictates weekly network audits, where operators use expensive physical testing gear to sweep the copper lines, ensuring the signal return loss is not greater than 15 decibels.
Wow.
If a wire is crimped and reflects signal back, they have to tear it out of the wall. They have monthly hydraulic flushes, draining and replacing the high-viscosity synthetic fluids so microscopic abrasions don't score the lift cylinders. And most importantly, the quarterly cleanroom calibrations.
That last one is a matter of life and death for the data. The massive overhead HEPA filters are replaced, and the positive air pressure in the room is rigorously calibrated. Positive pressure ensures that when a door opens, air rushes out, preventing dirty air from rushing in. Because if a single microscopic speck of concrete dust lands on a magnetic platter spinning exposed at 10,000 RPM, the read head will slam into that dust boulder, causing a catastrophic head crash that carves a physical trench into the metal platter, and the forensic data is gone forever.
Okay, so Sector 1 has successfully extracted the raw data block from the crushed hard drive. It has been cleanly handed off over the fiber lines. Now, how does the bunker find the tiny microsecond flaw, the single line of corrupted logic hidden inside millions of lines of code?
Yeah, how?
We have to leave the mechanical grind and enter the mind of the facility. Welcome to Sector 2, the Orion Deep Data Processing Matrix.
If Sector 1 is a heavy industrial machine shop, Sector 2 is a sensory deprivation chamber. It is entirely different from the mechanical violence we just witnessed. Orion is housed in a heavily insulated lead-lined subterranean vault engineered to achieve near absolute thermal stability. Simply walking into the room, the ambient temperature is held at a freezing 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
But the core processing units themselves, these ancient, heavily overclocked silicon architecture clusters doing the heavy math, they aren't just sitting in the cold air. They are submerged entirely in massive vats of non-conductive dielectric fluid.
Ah, liquid cooling.
Because they are pushing the voltage so high to get processing speed, normal air cooling would fail, and the chips would literally melt themselves into silicon puddles. So they are submerged in fluid flowing at 500 gallons per minute, chilling the bare chips to a constant minus 40 degrees Celsius.
And that primary dielectric fluid is, in turn, cooled by a massive secondary liquid nitrogen, or LN2, closed-loop system. The liquid nitrogen is pumped at an incredible 150 psi through specialized vacuum-jacketed stainless steel piping. These pipes are insulated to a vacuum level of less than 10 microns to prevent any ambient heat transfer.
The engineering logs warn about a specific, terrifying danger inherent to this liquid nitrogen loop. If a mechanical phase separator valve fails, liquid nitrogen, which is minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit, could accidentally enter a warmer gas-only return line.
The physics of that failure are catastrophic. When liquid nitrogen warms up and turns into a gas, its volume expands by a factor of nearly 700 instantly.
Yeah.
If liquid enters a closed gas pipe, that sudden, explosive, rapid expansion event would create a pressure bomb.
It would just explode.
It's capable of tearing the heavy industrial stainless steel plumbing straight off the concrete walls, suffocating the entire sector and freezing, oxygen displacing nitrogen gas in seconds.
So they're doing math inside a ticking thermodynamic bomb. Now, where is Orion actually keeping the decades of historical crash data to compare against these new failures? The schematics detail the magnetic tape silos and the robotic retrieval system.
Because they don't trust spinning hard drives for long-term storage due to their mechanical fragility, they use massive linear tape open, or LTO, magnetic tape cartridges. These tapes are arranged in a staggering 40-foot-high hexagonal honeycomb matrix.
It's like a beehive.
Magnetic tape is an archival storage medium that, when properly shielded, is totally immune to EMPs and immune to bit rot, the gradual decay of digital data on modern solid-state drives.
Yeah.
But to access these thousands of tapes quickly, they rely on the Automated Retrieval Automaton, the ARA.
The ARA operates on a heavy-duty dual rail track running down the center of the honeycomb, utilizing heavy pneumatic claws and high-torque servo motors.
The specs on the ARA are frightening. It accelerates at 15 meters per second along the rails.
Yeah.
I picture it like a terrifying high-speed mechanical librarian. You submit a query, and this massive metal rig violently whips down the 40-foot corridor at highway speeds, its pneumatic claw literally snatching specific tape cartridges from the honeycomb slots, and then it slams them violently into one of the 128 heavy-duty tape drives to spool them up.
Once the tapes are spinning and the historical data is ready, we get to the human element of Orion. And this is where the cybernetics go from mechanical assistance to deep biological integration, the neural sync and the ghost trace. Operating the Orion terminal requires a fundamentally different interface. The operator in this sector doesn't use hands, and they don't use the CRT ocular replacements.
They use a direct cortical interface. A heavy, shielded fiber optic umbilical cable literally drops from the ceiling of the vault and locks directly into a heavy metallic cervical port surgically implanted at the base of the operator's skull.
That is wild.
This port feeds raw, unformatted hexadecimal data directly into the human visual cortex, completely bypassing the eyes.
The biological toll this takes on the human body is severe and meticulously documented. When the Orion terminal enters stellar network sync mode and the raw data from the tape drives begins flooding the organic brain, the operator's autonomic nervous system goes into severe shock.
It's just too much data.
Heart rate spikes to 150 BPM, blood pressure skyrockets, and core body temperature elevates dangerously as the brain burns extreme calories processing the data. To protect the organic tissue from seizing, the port utilizes physical synaptic relay buffers. These act as biological fuses. If a data surge occurs that would trigger a grand mal seizure, the buffer physically burns out first, cutting the connection.
If the operator's EEG brainwave patterns begin to enter a disorganized theta wave cascade, meaning the brain is literally short-circuiting, a hardware failsafe engages, physically and violently ejecting the heavy fiber optic plug from the back of the skull to sever the connection and prevent permanent neurological burnout.
Wow.
So what on earth is worth taking that physical risk? What are they doing with this direct brain link? They're executing what the logs call the ghost trace.
The ghost trace is a proprietary, heavily guarded, DOS-based heuristic algorithm.
Yeah.
It doesn't just look for broken code. It searches for invisible microfractures in the logic by rapidly cross-referencing the current failure data extracted in Sector 1 against the decades of historical tape archives. It looks for patterns that a machine would miss, utilizing human intuition at light speed.
Let's read the terminal dump from a specific anomaly detection log to see how this actually works. The green terminal text reads, SYS bracket receiving handoff from black box subnet. The green terminal text reads, SYS bracket ingesting 4.2 terabytes of raw hex telemetry. Then the operator initiates the heuristic sweep, and we see the ARA robot engage. Then the operator initiates the heuristic sweep, and we see the ARA robot engage, ARA underscore robotics bracket requesting archival tape cartridges. Then the operator initiates the heuristic sweep, and we see the ARA robot engage, fetching slot 44-B-9, fetching slot 12-F-3. Then the operator initiates the heuristic sweep, and we see the ARA robot engage. The human brain is now comparing the current aircraft telemetry dump with the historical failures being spooled off the tapes, and then at the speed of thought, it hits a snag.
The log outputs a chilling discovery. Warn bracket ghost trace initiated. Warn bracket timing mismatch detected in flight control bus logic.
14:32:01.004, sensor 4 reported hydraulic pressure loss. Valve 7 actuated. 14:32:01.002.
Stop and look at those exact timestamps. The hydraulic valve physically actuated at 0.002 seconds. But the sensor warning the system that hydraulic pressure was lost didn't happen until 0.004 seconds. The terminal flags this impossible physics. Critical bracket valve actuation preceded sensor failure warning by 0.002 seconds. Critical bracket impossible causality loop detected in a logic gates.
That is the crucial microsecond flaw. A computer cannot react to a failure that hasn't officially registered yet. It violates causality. The plane commanded a valve to close before it knew it was in danger. Recognizing this impossibility, the human operator forces a neural sync override, demanding the system dive deeper to find the exact line of code causing this loop. The logs show the operator's heart rate spikes to 145 BPM. Cortical temperature hits 38.5 degrees Celsius. They're physically burning up.
The system isolates the corrupted logic block, flooding the operator's brain with raw hex until human intuition spots the exact anomaly, a null pointer exception. A piece of code was looking for a variable that didn't exist, which caused the core logic to panic and skip a crucial instruction.
But this wasn't a random glitch.
No, it was caused by a forced override from an unknown, highly classified subroutine hidden deep in the firmware labeled ghost_CMD. The cybernetic operator literally found the ghost in the machine, the hidden command that crashed the plane.
And because this heuristic processing power is so incredibly delicate, it must be fiercely protected from the violent electrical reality of the rest of the bunker. The documentation outlines the sector isolation protocols. Orion must be shielded from the massive, unpredictable EMP bursts generated by the raw plasma in Sector 0.
They built the entire Orion vault as a mathematically perfect Faraday cage. The walls, the floor, and the ceiling are lined with heavy, overlapping plates of thick copper and mu metal.
I should clarify what mu metal actually is because it's not a common material.
Yeah, please do.
Mu metal is a highly specialized, incredibly expensive nickel-iron soft ferromagnetic alloy. It has what physicists call incredibly high magnetic permeability. This means instead of reflecting magnetic fields like a mirror reflects light, it absorbs and redirects magnetic field lines, channeling them through the metal itself and safely around the room.
Oh, I get it.
It ensures that the massive magnetic tapes housing the world's forensic history aren't instantly wiped blank when the plasma generator spikes.
But if the room is a perfect metal box, how do the copper data wires from Sector 1 get inside without carrying the high-voltage EMP spike with them? The engineers solved this using opto-isolators. The electrical data coming down the copper wire from Sector 1 hits a terminal right outside the vault. It is converted into a rapid pulse of light, shot across a tiny physical air gap through a glass tube, and then a sensor on the inside of the vault converts that light back into electrical signals on the other side. Raw, dangerous voltage physically cannot travel across the light gap into the Orion core. And to be completely isolated from the Sector 0 generator, Orion's power is supplied entirely by a massive subterranean bank of submarine-grade lead-acid trickle-charge batteries.
This extreme paranoid isolation brings us to a massive pivot point in our deep dive. Up until now, we've established that the internal hardware is perfect. It is mechanically brutal, entirely isolated from digital threats, and meticulously maintained by cybernetic crews.
Right.
But what about the physical reality outside the concrete walls?
Exactly. The bunker isn't in a vacuum, it is buried in the earth, and the outside world is toxic, vibrating, and quite literally trying to crush the facility. How does a place that requires absolute microscopic perfection survive the shifting, violent geology of the earth itself? Welcome to Section 4, Sector 3, Perimeter Defenses, and the Gestalt Protocol. Let's start with the most basic biological necessity, which is the air they breathe. The logs outline the Subterranean Atmospheric Scrubber Array, or SASA.
The surface air above the bunker is assumed to be laden with corrosive particulates, acid rain, and ionized gases that would easily strip the delicate cold plating off the exposed motherboard buses inside the clean rooms over time. SASA is a massive 200-foot vertical intake shaft designed with a specific velocity drop architecture to slow the incoming air down.
At the very top of the shaft, sitting flush with the surface, there are heavy steel louvered blast doors. If perimeter sensors detect a sudden overpressure wave like an explosive shock wave from a surface blast, these massive doors slam shut in exactly 0.4 seconds.
That's fast.
And they don't use standard hydraulic fluid to close them because fluid takes time to pump. They use pre-charged, heavily compressed nitrogen accumulators. It's a zero-latency mechanical trigger that snaps the steel doors shut instantly.
Assuming the surface isn't exploding, the air is drawn down the 200-foot shaft and enters the cyclonic separation chamber. Massive, screaming impeller fans spin the incoming air into a violent high-speed vortex. Centrifugal force pushes the heavier, corrosive metallic dust and large particulates to the outside walls of the cyclone, where they lose velocity and fall harmlessly into a subterranean slag pit.
Right.
But that only removes the physical dirt. The chemical gases are the real threat.
Next, the air is forced into the chemical scrubbing baths. They take this dirty air and physically bubble it through 5,000-gallon glass-lined steel vats of heavily concentrated liquid sodium hydroxide, maintaining a highly alkaline pH of 11.5. This violently strips out acidic gases and heavy carbon dioxide. Now, I have to push back hard on this. Sodium hydroxide is basically boiling lye.
Yeah, it is.
Why would you build giant vats of boiling lye inside a bunker filled with fragile electronics and human operators? That seems infinitely more dangerous than just using massive, standard charcoal carbon filters. Why take that insane risk?
It comes down to longevity and supply chains. Charcoal carbon filters are highly effective, but they become saturated. Once a carbon filter is full of toxins, it is useless, and you have to rely on a surface supply chain to bring you new, clean filters. In a post-collapse scenario, there are no supply chains.
Oh.
Sodium hydroxide baths are wildly dangerous, yes, but they can be chemically regenerated indefinitely if you control the pH. It is a calculated risk favoring permanent self-reliance over temporary safety.
But maintaining those vats is a terrifying, highly manual process. The cybernetic crew doesn't use digital pH meters because they degrade in the caustic environment. They have to physically walk up to the vats and perform manual litmus paper tests. When the pH drops below 11.5, the operators have to manually shovel raw caustic soda pellets into the active boiling vats to raise the alkalinity. The manual specifically warns the operators that a single splash of this alkaline solution will dissolve organic human tissue so fast that the chemical burn will eat through the skin before the nerve pain receptors can even send a signal to the brain.
It is grim work, and after the air survives the chemical wash, it emerges soaking wet and highly basic. It cannot enter the server rooms like that, so it immediately passes through the desiccant dehumidification array. These are giant, slowly rotating honeycomb wheels packed tightly with silica gel, which violently absorbs the moisture from the air.
Right, like those little packets and shoeboxes, but massive.
Exactly. And here's where the brutalist engineering recycling comes into play. Once a section of the wheel is saturated with water, it rotates into a separate chamber where it is baked bone dry by a stream of superheated exhaust air piped directly from the Sector Zero diesel generators.
The waste heat of the engine keeps the air dry. Finally, the dry air passes through massive HEPA filters, trapping particles down to 0.01 microns, and it is pumped into the facility. So the air is solved. But what about the Earth itself moving around them? We talked about earthquakes earlier. The documentation covers tectonic dampening.
The most surprising fact about this bunker is that the internal facility is not rigidly anchored to the bedrock. It floats.
It floats.
Yes. The entire 80,000 square foot titanium slab and the server vaults are suspended on 144 massive, custom-engineered hydraulic struts. This is entirely to protect the delicate spinning magnetic hard drives in Sector 1 from the microscopic vibrations of distant tectonic earthquakes, which would cause catastrophic head crashes.
But these aren't normal shocks. Each massive strut contains a heavy chromium piston resting inside a cylinder filled with a highly specialized liquid called magnetorheological, or MR, fluid.
Let's explain the fascinating physics of MR fluid. It is essentially an incredible synthetic oil that is heavily saturated with microscopic, magnetically responsive iron particles. Under normal conditions, it flows smoothly like regular oil, allowing the bunker to gently sway and absorb normal ambient vibrations.
But embedded deep in the bedrock surrounding the bunker are arrays of geophones. These sensors calculate the speed and frequency of incoming seismic waves in milliseconds. When a violent shock wave hits the bedrock, the sensors fire a massive electrical current directly through thick electromagnetic coils wrapped around the outside of the hydraulic struts.
And instantly, we are talking less than 5 milliseconds, the magnetic field penetrates the oil. Those millions of microscopic iron particles instantly align along the magnetic field lines, linking together like microscopic chains. The fluid changes from a smooth liquid into a rigid, near-solid state in the blink of an eye.
Wow.
The struts lock perfectly rigid, violently counteracting the exact frequency of the earthquake wave, and then instantly return to fluid once the wave passes.
It's an engineering marvel, but the sheer weight of the facility floating on those pistons causes the high-pressure rubber seals to eventually tear. And when they do, the crew has to execute what the manual calls a foundation lockdown. The cybernetic operators have to crawl into the cramped, freezing crawl spaces beneath the floor.
Sounds miserable.
They use heavy pneumatic sledgehammers to manually drive massive steel locking pins into the strut housing to hold the bunker up. They drain the toxic air fluid, use heavy manual chain hoists to physically extract the 300-pound chromium piston out of the casing, and rebuild the seals by hand in the dirt.
And who is actually doing this back-breaking, filthy labor? The manual introduces the roamers. These are the untethered maintenance units of the cybernetic crew. Unlike Zero or Primey, they aren't hardwired into consoles.
They are completely mobile. They run on internal heavy-duty lead-acid battery packs strapped to their backs that give them exactly 14 hours of operational time before they drop dead and have to recharge. And because they spend their time crawling around the massive diesel generators and the high-voltage matrix, their biological brains are shielded by thick, heavy helmets forged from depleted uranium to protect them from the localized radiation and EMPs.
Their arms aren't designed for typing. They are modular industrial tools. A left arm might be a 2,500 foot-pound pneumatic impact wrench for unbolting the struts. The right arm might be a functioning oxyacetylene cutting torch for slicing away warped blast shielding.
And because standard wireless signals physically cannot penetrate the thick lead-lined walls between sectors, they communicate via a beautifully primitive plug-and-dump protocol.
Yeah, they literally operate like high-tech carrier pigeons. They carry physical, heavily armored external hard drives on their belts. If a sensor in the air intake fails, the roamer plugs a thick serial cable from their chest directly into a wall diagnostic port, downloads the fault code onto the drive, and then physically walks the drive a quarter-mile back to Zero at the center console, handing it over so Zero can analyze it. It's entirely physical.
All of this intense manual maintenance, the air scrubbing, the tectonic floating, it all leads to the facility's ultimate function, detailed in the most classified section of the logs, the Gestalt protocol. Tri-sector convergence.
This is the moment when an engineering failure out in the real world is so incredibly massive, so convoluted, that physical mechanics, quantum data, and environmental variables are all impossibly tangled together. The normal segmented workflow of the bunker isn't enough, so they effectively tear down the walls and turn the entire bunker and every human mind inside it into one giant, synchronized superbrain.
When the Gestalt is initiated, safety limits are universally abandoned. Zero physically bypasses the thermal limiters on the central lightning matrix, deliberately spiking the raw plasma to an ungodly, highly unstable 3.1 megavolts to maximize computational throughput. The peripheral data frames that normally segment the data are mechanically bypassed. All three CRT monitors across the entire facility, Zero, Primey, and Orion sync their refresh rates to exactly 60,000 hertz to align the biological brains operating them.
The manual provides a chilling example of a full Gestalt sync. They use the deep layer forensic autopsy of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, mission STS-51L. The central terminal warns in red text, critical bracket complexity threshold exceeded on black box autopsy, STS-51L. The central terminal warns in red text. The system detects that the failure wasn't just mechanical, it wasn't just weather, and it wasn't just procedural. It was a deadly convergence of all three vectors. The standard ghost trace fails to find a single point of failure.
So Zero slams the physical lever and authorizes the Gestalt. The diesel generators scream as they spin up to 115% load capacity, pushing past their red line. The lightning matrix hits 3.1 megavolts, the glass table glowing a blinding white. The copper Faraday shielding lining the walls strains at 94% absorption capacity, the metal actually humming with trapped energy.
And the human toll is horrific. The Orion operator is pushed to the absolute brink of human endurance. The logs record the operator's heart rate holding at 168 BPM for over an hour. The system intentionally bypasses the biological synaptic neural fuses we talked about earlier.
Wow.
The protocol coldly accepts that permanent organic tissue damage to the operator's brain is probable after 45 minutes of sync. The combined minds of the crew cross-reference millions of pages of vehicle engineering archives, dense atmospheric weather telemetry from launch day, and the raw hexadecimal dumps from the recovered shuttle fragments all simultaneously.
And through this massive, painful convergence of human intuition and raw plasma math, the output hex finally reveals the terrifying intersection of causality. The screen outputs, Gestalt underscore merge bracket thiacal SRB joint tolerance, Gestalt underscore merge bracket ambient temp, 36F O-ring resilience, null.
The system proves that at exactly 36 degrees, the rubber O-ring lost its physical elasticity. It can no longer fill the tiny 0.0004-inch gap in the steel joint. Then the timeline merges perfectly into a unified truth. Gestalt underscore merge bracket ignition over pressure sequence, Gestalt underscore merge bracket joint rotation detected at T plus 7.670 seconds, Gestalt underscore merge bracket blow-by confirmed. The root causality loop is definitively closed. The exact truth is isolated, burned onto a magnetic tape, and the Gestalt is aggressively severed to save the operators' lives.
But possessing the absolute truth makes the bunker a massive target. What happens if this truth is threatened? What if a massive aerospace corporation or a hostile government discovers the location of the facility and tries to breach the concrete to confiscate the autopsy? The final module in this section outlines the ultimate irreversible failsafe, the Scuttle Protocol.
The dead man's switch. The bunker is laced with military-grade RDX-shaped charges, intentionally pointed directly at the main load-bearing support pillars. But they don't just detonate the explosives and blow the roof. That might leave the hard drives intact for recovery. They weaponize the facility's extreme engineering against itself to destroy the data securely in a multi-stage sequence.
First, they trigger a catastrophic failure of the cooling system. They intentionally blow the liquid nitrogen phase separators in Sector 2. The expanding nitrogen gas instantly drops the ambient temperature of the vault to minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. This flash freezes the massive magnetic tape silers, making the flexible mylar ribbons brittle as glass. When the blast wave hits, those frozen tapes shatter into microscopic, unrecoverable dust.
Simultaneously, massive steel locking pins are forcefully fired directly into the spinning diesel transmission gears. The shafts violently lock up, the engine torque shears the metal, and the massive heavy iron flywheels instantly shatter into thousands of pieces of uncontained, lethal shrapnel, destroying the entire power plant.
Finally, Zero deliberately overloads the lightning matrix, allowing the plasma to breach containment. This unleashes a massive, localized EMP that permanently magnetizes and destroys every silicon chip and vaporizes the delicate copper traces on the motherboards. Only after the logic is entirely dead do the RDX charges detonate, dropping the 200-foot surface intake shaft directly down onto the primary diagnostic slab, crushing whatever wreckage was being analyzed. As the manual coldly states, the data is preserved or it is buried forever.
Okay, let's take a breath, because we've built this incredible, perfectly sealed, heavily defended fortress. It is buried in bedrock, runs on plasma, and is ready to self-destruct if anyone ever finds it. Right. So how do they actually interact with the outside world? How do they get the world's most highly classified crash data into the bunker to autopsy in the first place? And how do they broadcast the truth? We enter the final phase of our deep dive. Section 5, Sector 4, Comms, and Global Intercept Architecture.
Sector 4 is entirely about aggressive passive network interception and absolutely untraceable data exfiltration. The bunker operates in absolute radio silence. They cannot use standard satellite dishes or Wi-Fi arrays, as those are instantly triangulated by military surveillance. So, how do you receive data through 200 feet of solid rock? The blueprints detail the VLF antenna array.
VLF stands for Very Low Frequency Radio Waves. Because standard high-frequency radio waves bounce off the earth or are absorbed by the soil, they are useless underground. So they plowed miles of heavy-gauge, unshielded copper cables directly into the earth surrounding the bunker.
VLF operates between 3 kHz and 30 kHz. These frequencies create incredibly long, rolling wavelengths that literally span 10 to 100 kilometers. These massive slow waves don't bounce off the Earth's crust, they penetrate right through the bedrock. Inside the bunker, they catch these faint waves using massive 4,000-pound ferrite cores. And to amplify the signal, they don't use modern silica transistors, which would fry in an EMP. They use massive glass vacuum tubes.
But the trade-off for penetrating rock is bandwidth. At VLF frequencies, the data transfer rate is agonizingly slow. We are talking 300 bits per second. You cannot download a terabyte of aerospace hex data at 300 bits per second. It would take centuries.
Right.
So the VLF array is really just a cosmic pager system. It receives short encryption keys, sync codes, and activation alerts. For the real massive data dumps, they have to physically tap the internet's backbone, which is detailed in the deep oceanic fiber tapping module.
This is the most legally and technically audacious operation they run. This is passive optical sniffing on massive transoceanic internet trunk lines via untethered deep-sea robotic crawlers. The mechanical challenge here is severe. If you physically cut a fiber optic cable on the ocean floor to splice into it, you instantly trigger what are called optical time domain reflectometer alarms at the corporate landing stations on the coast. They instantly know exactly where the cut happened, and they send submarines.
Though they don't cut the cable, the robotic crawler gently strips away the heavy steel armor and Kevlar wrapping, exposing the bare glass fiber. Then it executes a technique called the macro bend. To visualize this, think of skipping a stone on a calm pond. If you throw the stone at a shallow angle, it bounces off the surface. That's total internal reflection, which is how a laser stays trapped inside the glass fiber, bouncing off the walls. But if you violently bend the water, making the angle too steep, the stone doesn't bounce. It plunges straight through the surface.
Exactly. The robotic crawler clamps onto the bare glass and bends it at a precise, mathematically calculated angle. This violently steepens the angle of the laser bouncing inside, forcing a microscopic fraction of the photons to fail to reflect. They leak straight through the side of the glass without disrupting the main data stream.
And how do you capture a few leaking photons at the bottom of the ocean?
The crawler uses avalanche photodiodes pressed directly against the bend. These are incredible quantum sensors. When a single leaked photon hits the sensor, it knocks an electron loose. A high-voltage field inside the sensor violently accelerates that electron, causing it to crash into other atoms, knocking more electrons loose, creating an avalanche effect. It amplifies a single microscopic photon leak into a readable electrical current.
But because they are tapping a major oceanic trunk, they're intercepting the entire ocean's traffic. Millions of emails, streaming movies, banking data. It's a fire hose of noise. So the crawler beams the raw data to Prime, who uses brute force hardware logic gates to filter 99.9% of the noise, aggressively searching exclusively for specific hexadecimal headers that match classified aerospace telemetry and nuclear failure codes.
But what if the data they need isn't crossing an ocean? What if a corporation locks down a terrestrial server inside a data center in a landlocked state? The manual details their protocol for terrestrial interception, which is BGP hijacking.
BGP stands for Border Gateway Protocol, and this is fascinating because BGP is the fundamental routing protocol of the entire internet. It operates entirely on trust. It constantly searches for the shortest, most efficient route for data to travel from point A to point B.
I like to use an analogy for this. Imagine the internet is the global postal system. You drop a highly classified letter in the mail. BGP is the central computer at the post office deciding which mail trucks get it there fastest.
Right. So what xRTFMx does is essentially break into the post office's central computer, maliciously alter the maps, and reroute every single mail truck carrying a specific corporate secret so that it drives directly down their hidden underground driveway. They quickly photocopy all the mail as the truck drives past, and then route the truck back onto the highway before the postmaster even notices it took a detour.
Let's look at the actual terminal log for a BGP execution. The target corporate server IP range is identified as 198.51.1000/24. The operator executes the command. The operator executes the command c://sys/net/bgp_ghost.exe/target 198.51.100.0/24/24/SPOFF_IS:64512.
The bunker mathematically spoofs its identity, loudly broadcasting to the internet that it is Autonomous System 645.112, a legitimate network hub. It injects false, highly optimized routes into the trunk line. The global internet routing tables update. The propagation hits 89%, and the route poisoning is successful. The target corporation server now mathematically believes that routing their massive data transfer through the xRTFMx bunker is the absolute fastest backup route available.
The traffic instantly flows down into the bunker. The heavy packet sniffer on Zero's terminal scans the rushing data and identifies the exact classified hex header it wants. AEORO _FLAEU_log_00. It strips the encrypted payload, routes a perfect clone of the data straight to the magnetic drives in Sector 1, and seamlessly forwards the original packets out of the bunker to their true destination.
The logs show they cloned 1.8 terabytes of highly classified drone failure data in exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. And once the clone is secure, Zero flushes the false routing tables. The detour vanishes. The corporate network administrators sitting in an office miles away see a minor 40-millisecond latency spike on their dashboard, chalk it up to standard internet traffic, and think absolutely nothing of it.
And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. They've tapped the cables, hijacked the routes, processed the data in plasma, and found the ghost in the machine. Once the autopsy is finished and the truth is isolated, how do they release it to the world without revealing their location? The documentation outlines the dead hand broadcast.
The system architects designed this facility with a sense of grim irony. They packaged the completed forensic autopsy deep dive into a heavily compressed .png image file. And then they push it back to the surface. But they don't upload it to a server. They use a hidden, heavily camouflaged surface parabolic microwave dish. They blast a violently compressed 1.2-second burst transmission straight up into the exosphere, aimed directly at decommissioned, abandoned Cold War-era orbital satellites.
These satellites are essentially space junk, but their analog transponders still work. The satellite receives this sudden, massive microwave burst and acts as a blind repeater. It blindly scatters the .png file across global peer-to-peer networks, ham radio frequencies, and hidden torrent trackers worldwide. By the time the targeted corporations detect the leak and try to trace the signal's origin, the satellite has drifted back into dormancy, and the bunker is absolutely silent beneath 200 feet of bedrock.
If you're listening to this right now, wondering how this abstract, brutalist science fiction connects to your life, I want you to think about the last time a piece of technology failed you. Maybe it was an app crashing, or maybe it was a news story about a smart car inexplicably swerving off a road, a story that quietly disappeared from the headlines a week later. Corporations and governments spend billions of dollars and deploy armies of lawyers and PR teams to digitally scrub their catastrophic failures from the internet. They do it to protect their stock prices, their reputations, and their algorithms.
The xRTFMx bunker represents a radical, violently physical resistance to that digital erasure. It is a place where the unvarnished mechanical truth cannot be deleted by a PR team. It is burned onto indestructible magnetic tape by human operators who bleed for the data, and it is forced back into the light. It makes you wonder, what catastrophic engineering failures in our daily lives have already been quietly scrubbed from the official record, just waiting for a subterranean system to pull them back out of the dark?
End of official system log. All diagnostic parameters have been recorded to the magnetic tape silos. Disengaging neural link and initiating cold iron shutdown sequence. The data has been secured. Until the next catastrophic failure requires a physical autopsy, remember the protocol, read the manual. Transmission terminated.
Uplink confirmed. The iron firewall is holding. Subscribe now to secure your terminal in the Iowa sector. Don't let the surface noise drown out the truth. Local data synchronized. Check the links in the description below to access the raw schematics and evidence logs for today's briefing. The architect is online. We're building for the collapse. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to help us reinforce the grid.
Drawing heavy voltage for this analysis. Hit that notification bell while I stabilize the grid. You don't want to be offline when the next breach hits.
Corporate intrusion detected. To fund our countermeasures, join the xRTFMx-URSA. We need the resources to keep this sector dark. Internal flow is stable. Comment below and tell us which technological artifact we should de-redact next. Your input guides the scavenger.
The signal is fading into the static. Subscribe to the bunker now before the surface noise cuts our transmission for good.
The truth is permanent, but access is restricted. Click the link in the description to join our community and see the files they tried to wipe.
The biological backdoor is closed. Join the xRTFMx-URSA, stay system literate, and we'll see you at the next breach. Logging out. The autopsy on subject name begins now. Subscribe to the black box to witness the forensic truth. Decryption of the black box is complete. Check the links in the description for the full technical breakdown. Physical evidence doesn't lie. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to help us deconstruct the wreckage. Stabilizing the forensic terminal. Hit that notification bell to ensure the log stays synced to your device. Counter-intrusion active. Support the mission. Join the xRTFMx-URSA to keep the corporate vultures away from our data. Archiving the disaster. Tell us in the comments which mechanical failure we should investigate next.
The signal is dropping. Subscribe to the black box now to stay updated on the next catastrophic failure.
The evidence is permanent. Click the link in the description to join our crew and see the restricted findings.
The human element was the first failure. Join the xRTFMx crew, read the manual, and stay safe. Logging out. The vision is live. Subscribe to secure your feed and watch us pull the truth from the shadows. Rendering matrix at maximum resolution. Check the links in the description to see the raw visual evidence for yourself. The architect is online. We build what they try to hide.
Join the xRTFMx-URSA to keep the engine running.
Grid stabilized. Hit that notification bell while we warm up the next render. Don't let the signal drop. Breach detected in the firewall. Support our defense by joining the xRTFMx-URSA. We need the numbers to hold the line.
32 terabytes and counting. Comment below with the next subject we should render in 8K.
The broadcast is fading. Subscribe now to stay synced before the storm wipes the frequency. The files are secured. Click the link in the description to access the restricted investigation logs.
Memory is the first target. Join the xRTFMx-URSA, stay literate, and keep the vision alive. Logging out.